Pre-Socratic Philosophers by Julien Hyun. Copyright 2024. Author name. All rights reserved. Table of contents. Prologue. Introduction to Pre-Socratic Philosophers. Chapter 1 Thales. Chapter 2 Anaximander. Chapter 3 Anaximenes. Chapter 4 Pythagoras. Chapter 5 Heraclitus. Chapter 6 Parmenides. Chapter 7 Empedocles. Chapter 8 Anaxagoras. Chapter 9 Leucippus. Chapter 10 Democritus. Summary: the influence of pre-Socratic philosophers on modern thought. Prologue. In this book, we delve into the profound ideas and enduring legacy of the pre-Socratic philosophers, a group of thinkers who laid the foundation for Western philosophy and scientific inquiry. These early philosophers broke away from mythological explanations of the world and sought natural, rational causes to explain the universe's workings. Their revolutionary thinking continues to resonate today, influencing modern science, metaphysics, ethics, and critical thinking. As you explore the following chapters, you will discover the groundbreaking contributions of figures like Thales, Anaximander, Heraclitus, and Parmenides. Each chapter offers a detailed exploration of their philosophies, the historical context in which they lived, and the lasting impact of their ideas on later thinkers and intellectual traditions. This book aims to provide readers with not only a historical overview of these philosophers, but also an understanding of how their ideas continue to shape contemporary thought. Whether you are a student of philosophy, a historian of ideas, or simply curious about the origins of scientific and philosophical inquiry, this book offers a comprehensive and accessible introduction to the world of the pre-Socratic philosophers. We hope this journey into the early roots of Western thought will inspire new perspectives and a deeper appreciation for the critical role these philosophers played in shaping our intellectual heritage. Please like and subscribe to our channel. Introduction to Pre-Socratic Philosophers. These philosophers lived during a time of intellectual ferment in the ancient Greek world, where the ideas of natural philosophy and metaphysics were being explored. The records of their existence align with what we know of the broader history of Greek thought. While the original documents are mostly lost, the secondary sources, archaeological finds, and manuscripts passed down over the centuries provide substantial evidence that these philosophers existed and shaped the course of Western philosophy. In other words, through inscriptions, fragments, and manuscripts, later philosophers recorded their thoughts, which had a significant impact on the development of philosophy and science in subsequent generations. The pre-Socratic philosophers, active primarily in the 6th and 5th centuries BCE, represent the dawn of Western philosophy. They were the first to shift away from mythological explanations of the world, instead exploring natural and rational ways to explain the cosmos, the nature of reality, and the principles governing existence. These thinkers are often regarded as the intellectual pioneers of ancient Greece, whose innovative ideas set the stage for later philosophical developments by figures like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Before the pre-Socratic era, Greek explanations for natural phenomena were largely mythological. Gods and supernatural forces were thought to control everything, from the weather to human fate. The pre-Socratics, however, introduced a new approach, arguing that the universe could be understood through observation, reason, and natural laws. They posed questions that still resonate today. What is the fundamental substance of the universe? How does change occur? What is the nature of reality? Among the earliest of these thinkers was Thales of Miletus, who proposed that water is the fundamental substance of all things. His student Anaximander introduced the concept of the apeiron, or the boundless, as the source of all things, while Anaximenes suggested air as the primary substance. Heraclitus famously declared that everything is in flux, emphasizing the importance of change in the universe, while Parmenides argued that change is an illusion and that reality is unchanging and eternal. These philosophers also laid the groundwork for natural science. Anaxagoras introduced the concept of nous mind as the organizing principle of the cosmos, while Leucippus and Democritus developed the theory of atomism. the idea that everything is composed of small, indivisible particles. Their inquiries into the nature of matter, existence, and the cosmos not only shaped ancient thought, but also foreshadowed modern scientific and philosophical ideas. In this introduction, we will explore the major themes and contributions of the Pre-Socratic philosophers, considering how their work continues to influence contemporary thinking in science, philosophy, and beyond. These thinkers challenged the accepted wisdom of their time, laying the foundations for rational inquiry and the pursuit of knowledge, a legacy that endures to this day. Chapter 1. Thales. Thales, 624 to 546 BCE of Miletus, was not only the first Western philosopher, but also a pioneering figure in mathematics, astronomy, and engineering. He lived in Miletus, an ancient Ionian city in present-day Turkey, and is widely recognized for his profound contributions to the shift from mythological to rational thought in ancient Greece. His influence marked the beginning of Western philosophy and laid the foundation for scientific and philosophical thinking. Life and background. Thales was born around 624 BCE into an aristocratic family in Miletus, a thriving coastal city known for its trade and intellectual vibrancy. The city was part of Ionia, an area heavily influenced by contact with both Mesopotamia and Egypt. These connections would have exposed Thales to diverse ideas and knowledge, particularly in geometry, astronomy, and engineering, which were highly developed in those ancient civilizations. Thales traveled to Egypt, where he absorbed Egyptian mathematical and astronomical knowledge. According to Herodotus, the ancient historian, Thales learned geometry during his time in Egypt, which he later adapted to solve practical problems in Greece. However, many of the biographical details of Thales' life come from later sources, and the specifics of his travels and education remain largely speculative. Despite these uncertainties, it is clear that Thales was recognized in his time as an accomplished thinker. He was considered one of the 7 sages of Greece. Philosophical thought. Thales' groundbreaking contribution to philosophy was his naturalistic approach to explaining the universe. Before Thales, Greek explanations for the nature of reality were rooted in mythology. Gods and supernatural forces were used to explain natural phenomena such as the weather, the cosmos, and even human behavior. Thales introduced a radically different idea, that the universe could be explained through natural causes rather than divine intervention. He sought to understand the cosmos by identifying a fundamental principle, or arch, that underlies all things. The principle of water as the arch. Thales proposed that water is the basic substance from which everything in the universe arises. His reasoning was based on observation. Water is essential to life. All living things, plants, animals, and humans, need water to survive. Water exists in different forms. Thales noted that water can exist as a liquid, solid ice, or gas steam, which suggested to him that water could transform into various states. Much like the changing forms in nature, water is ubiquitous. It was present in oceans, rivers, rainfall, and the moisture in the air. Thales believed that this single substance, water, was the origin of all matter. While this theory is scientifically outdated today, it was revolutionary in its time, because it represented an early attempt to find a unifying principle that could explain the diversity of the natural world. Thales' theory marked a departure from mythological explanations and pointed to the possibility that the universe could be understood through reason and observation. Cosmology and astronomy. Thales also applied his rational approach to cosmology, the study of the universe's origins and structure, and astronomy. According to Aristotle and Herodotus, Thales was the first to predict a solar eclipse, which occurred on May 28, 585 BCE. His ability to predict this event is often considered proof of his advanced understanding of the heavens, although the details of how he made this prediction remain unclear. Thales believed that the Earth floats on water, a concept possibly influenced by Egyptian cosmological beliefs. He theorized that the Earth is a flat disk resting on an endless sea, and that earthquakes occur when the Earth is rocked by waves in the water beneath it. Although inaccurate, this view represented an early attempt to explain natural phenomena without resorting to myths or supernatural forces. Natural philosophy. Thales is considered the founder of natural philosophy, which sought to understand the natural world through logical reasoning, rather than religious or mythological explanations. His emphasis on finding a single substance to explain the multiplicity of nature had a profound impact on later philosophers, many of whom developed their own theories of fundamental substances. For example, Anaximander, Thales' student, argued that the arch was not a specific element, like water, but rather the epeiron, an indefinite or boundless substance that gives rise to everything. Anaximenes, another student, proposed that air was the fundamental substance, capable of rarefaction, becoming finer to form fire, and condensation becoming denser to form water and earth. In this way, Thales' focus on identifying a unifying principle of nature opened the door to a wider investigation of the material composition of the universe, laying the groundwork for physics and metaphysics, scientific and mathematical contributions. In addition to his philosophical contributions, Thales made significant advances in mathematics and engineering. He is credited with several important geometrical discoveries, and his methods of using observation and logic to solve problems influenced the development of Euclidean geometry centuries later. Thales' theorems in geometry. One of Thales' most famous contributions is Thales' theorem, which states, if a triangle is inscribed in a circle, and one side is the diameter of the circle, the angle opposite that side is a right angle. This theorem is a foundational principle in geometry and is still taught today. According to historical sources, Thales is also credited with measuring the height of the pyramids in Egypt by using the length of their shadows and comparing it to his own shadow at the same time of day, dividing a circle into two equal parts by its diameter, using geometric principles to solve land measurement problems. Thales' work in geometry marked the beginning of deductive reasoning in mathematics, where conclusions are drawn logically from general principles. Famous sayings. Although no written works by Thales survive, several sayings attributed to him were passed down through other ancient sources. All things are full of gods. This saying suggests that Thales saw divine power or life forces present throughout the natural world, though not in the mythological sense. Instead, it seems to reflect his belief in the order and regularity of nature. Water is the principle of all things. This reflects his monistic belief that water is the arch, or first principle, from which everything arises. Know thyself. This phrase emphasizes the importance of self-awareness and introspection, which became a central theme in Greek philosophy, particularly for Socrates. Influence on later philosophers and thinkers. Thales had a profound influence on the development of Western philosophy and science. His insistence on finding natural explanations for the world paved the way for later philosophers, such as Pythagoras, Heraclitus, and Parmenides. More immediately, his successors in Miletus, Anaximander and Anaximenes, expanded on his ideas by proposing other fundamental substances. Aristotle regarded Thales as the first natural philosopher, and credited him with founding the Milesian school of philosophy. Aristotle's own works in metaphysics and physics were influenced by Thales' search for fundamental principles. Though Aristotle criticized Thales' choice of water as the basic substance, Thales also influenced later scientific thought by emphasizing observation, measurement, and rational deduction. He laid the groundwork for the development of the scientific method, a process that seeks to understand natural phenomena through empirical evidence and logical reasoning. Conclusion. Thales of Miletus was a transformative figure in ancient thought. By seeking to explain the world through natural causes rather than mythology, he introduced the concept of rational inquiry into the nature of reality. His belief that water was the origin of all things His advances in geometry and astronomy, and his influence on later philosophers mark him as one of the most significant figures in the history of Western thought. Thales' legacy lives on in the philosophical traditions of naturalism, monism, and scientific reasoning, making him a cornerstone in the development of both philosophy and science. Chapter 2: Anaximander. Anaximander, 610–546 BCE, a pre-Socratic philosopher from Miletus, was a student and possible successor of Thales. He is one of the earliest Western philosophers known to have written a philosophical treatise. Even though only fragments of his work have survived, Anaximander expanded on the ideas of his teacher, Thales, and is most famous for proposing the concept of the Epeiron, the boundless or infinite as the source of all things. His contributions to cosmology, geography, and biology marked him as one of the most original thinkers of his time. Life and background. Anaximander was born around 610 BCE in Miletus, a prosperous Ionian city on the coast of modern-day Turkey. Like Thales, he was part of the intellectual community in Miletus that sought natural explanations for the workings of the universe, shifting away from the traditional reliance on mythological explanations. There is little detailed information about Anaximander's life, but he is believed to have traveled extensively, perhaps as a politician or explorer. His voyages likely influenced his understanding of geography and cosmology. Anaximander is credited with producing one of the first world maps, based on knowledge gathered from travel and exploration. He may also have been involved in building a gnomon, an early astronomical instrument to measure time and seasons. Philosophical thought. Anaximander's philosophical contributions go beyond merely responding to Thales' ideas. He was interested in the origins of the cosmos and sought a deeper understanding of the natural world. His most famous idea is his concept of the Epeiron, the source of all things. Anaximander rejected his teacher Thales' view that water was the fundamental substance of the universe. Instead, he proposed that the first principal arch was not any specific element, such as water, air, or fire, but rather something more abstract, the Epeiron. This word can be translated as the boundless, the indefinite, or the infinite. The Epeiron was an infinite, eternal substance that had no specific qualities, like those of the four classical elements earth, air, fire, water. Anaximander reasoned that a specific element, like water, couldn't explain the variety and oppositional nature of things in the world, e.g. hot versus cold, dry versus wet. Instead, the Epeiron, being boundless, was the formless source, from which all things originated and into which they would eventually return. According to Anaximander, from the Epeiron, the opposites hot-cold, wet-dry were separated out, and through this process, the cosmos was formed. These opposites were constantly in conflict, but a cosmic balance was maintained by a principle of justice, as each opposite would eventually return to the Epeiron. This eternal cycle of creation and destruction was driven by necessity without any divine intervention. This concept of the Epeiron was one of the earliest philosophical attempts to explain the infinite and the fundamental nature of the universe. It was an abstract idea that significantly influenced later philosophical discussions on metaphysics and the origins of existence. Cosmology. Anaximander's contributions to cosmology were groundbreaking. He proposed a mechanistic view of the universe, where natural forces, not gods, governed the cosmos. His model of the universe was radically different from those of his predecessors, and more abstract than Thales' idea of a watery world. Anaximander was one of the first thinkers to propose that the Earth floats freely in space without any support. He envisioned the Earth as a cylindrical shape, suspended in the center of the universe, equidistant from everything else. He reasoned that the Earth remained in place because of a form of equilibrium. It did not fall in any particular direction, because it was equally distant from everything else in the cosmos. This concept was revolutionary. It marked a departure from the earlier belief that the earth rested on something physical, such as water, as Thales suggested, or a giant creature. Anaximander also proposed that celestial bodies, such as the sun, moon, and stars, moved in circular paths around the earth. He believed these celestial bodies were huge rings of fire, enclosed within invisible wheels of dark mists. Holes in these misty wheels allowed the fire to be seen from Earth, as the sun, moon, or stars. He reasoned that when these holes closed, it caused phenomena like solar or lunar eclipses. Anaximander believed the sun was much larger than the Earth, contrary to the common belief that it was a small object. He calculated that the sun's diameter was 27 times greater than that of the Earth. He described the moon in similar terms, believing that lunar phases occurred because the opening to the fire behind the moon was gradually blocked. Anaximander's cosmological ideas represented a move toward a naturalistic and mechanical explanation of the cosmos, a key step in the development of astronomy and cosmology, biological and evolutionary thought. Anaximander is also considered one of the earliest thinkers to propose ideas about the evolution of life. He suggested that life began in the moisture of the earth, and that the first creatures were formed in water. These aquatic creatures eventually adapted to land, and evolved into more complex beings, including humans. Origin of life. Anaximander posited that humans must have originally been born from other types of animals, particularly aquatic creatures. He argued that humans could not have survived in their infancy without protection, and that early human ancestors must have been encased in fish-like shells before emerging onto land. This proto-evolutionary idea, while speculative, was remarkable for its time. It reflects Anaximander's naturalistic approach, where he sought explanations for biological phenomena through natural processes rather than mythological narratives. Works and fragments. Anaximander is the first philosopher known to have written a philosophical text, often referred to as On Nature. Unfortunately, the full text has been lost, and what remains of Anaximander's thought comes from later philosophers like Aristotle, Theophrastus, and Simplicius, who quoted or paraphrased his ideas. Only one fragment of his writing has survived, which is often cited as the earliest fragment of Western philosophy, that from which all things arise, and into which they return. This is the Epeiron, for they suffer punishment and give recompense to one another, according to the ordinance of time. Anaximander's fragment from Simplicius. This fragment reflects his belief in the eternal cycle of creation and destruction, where the opposites hot-cold, wetry come into conflict, yet are balanced by a cosmic principle of justice. The use of the term punishment suggests that when one force, like heat, exceeds its proper balance, it must eventually be brought back into equilibrium by its opposite. Influence and legacy. Anaximander's ideas profoundly influenced both philosophy and science. His concept of the Epeiron as an abstract, indefinite source of all things marked an important shift toward metaphysical thinking in ancient Greece, while his cosmological theories were later replaced by more sophisticated models. His attempts to explain the universe in terms of natural laws were pivotal in the development of scientific thought. Influence on later thinkers. Anaximenes, his student and successor, built on Anaximander's ideas, though he proposed that air, rather than the Epeiron, was the fundamental substance. Heraclitus and Parmenides, two major philosophers who followed him, were also influenced by Anaximander's thoughts on the nature of the cosmos and change. Aristotle and Theophrastus both discussed Anaximander's ideas in their works on early Greek philosophy, highlighting the importance of his contributions to natural philosophy. Anaximander's influence extended beyond philosophy into geography and cartography. He is credited with producing one of the earliest known maps of the known world, based on information from travelers and explorers. His map was revolutionary for its time, offering a view of the world that stretched beyond local knowledge and mythological descriptions. Conclusion. Anaximander was an innovative and bold thinker whose work pushed the boundaries of early Greek thought. His introduction of the ipeiron as the first principle, his early ideas on evolution, and his cosmological theories laid the foundation for many of the philosophical and scientific discussions that followed. His influence on natural philosophy, metaphysics, and early science is profound, marking him as one of the pivotal figures in the history of Western thought. Chapter 3: Anaximenes. Anaximenes, 585–525 BCE of Miletus, was a pre-Socratic philosopher, one of the key figures of the Milesian school, following the footsteps of Thales and Anaximander. As a disciple of Anaximander, Anaximenes further developed the ideas of his predecessors, but introduced his own distinctive concept of the fundamental principle, arch of the universe, while Anaximander had posited the indefinite and boundless ipeiron as the source of all things. Anaximenes proposed a more tangible and observable substance, air. Anaximenes was one of the earliest philosophers to attempt to explain the nature of reality in terms of a single, material substance that could undergo transformations and give rise to everything in the cosmos. His work influenced later thinkers and contributed to the development of natural philosophy. Life and background. Anaximenes was born around 585 BCE in Miletus, an Ionian city on the coast of what is now Turkey. Like his predecessors Thales and Anaximander, he was part of a vibrant intellectual community in Miletus that sought natural explanations for the workings of the cosmos. Although little is known about his personal life, his association with Anaximander suggests that he inherited and built upon the intellectual traditions of his teacher. The Milesian school, to which Anaximenes belongs, is considered the birthplace of natural philosophy in the Western world. These early philosophers sought to understand the universe through observation, reasoning, and the search for natural causes, marking a decisive move away from the mythological worldview that had dominated early Greek thought. Philosophical thought. Anaximenes is best known for his theory that the fundamental substance of the universe, or arch, is air in Greek. In this way, he followed the tradition of Thales, who posited water as the fundamental substance, but introduced his own observations to support air as the more appropriate candidate. Air is the fundamental substance, arch. Anaximenes believed that air was the essential, underlying substance from which all things arise and into which all things eventually return. He saw air as a dynamic and transformable element that could take on different forms through processes of condensation and rarefaction. Condensation, air could become denser, leading to the formation of liquid water and solid earth substances. Rarefaction, air could become thinner or more dispersed, transforming into fire. According to Anaximenes, air was a more fundamental principle than water or any other substance, because it was both ubiquitous and vital. He observed that air is everywhere and essential for life, just as water was important. But air could also undergo transformations into all other states of matter. Anaximenes' cosmology rested on the idea that air could transform into everything in the universe through its ability to change in density. He suggested that air, when it is thinned or rarefied, becomes fire. Air, when it is condensed, becomes wind, then cloud, and with further condensation, water, and eventually earth and stone. This continuum from air to fire, wind, water, and earth represents a cycle of transformation, in which all things arise from the fundamental principle of air. Anaximenes' idea that a single substance could undergo such transformations made him an important figure in the development of early physical theories about the composition of the universe. Cosmology. Anaximenes developed a more mechanistic and naturalistic view of the cosmos than his predecessors. He believed that natural forces, rather than divine powers, governed the universe, a significant departure from earlier mythological explanations. Anaximenes proposed a model of the universe, in which the earth is flat and rests on air, which he believed supported everything. He reasoned that air was not only the source of all things, but also the medium through which objects could be suspended. In his cosmology, celestial bodies like the sun, moon, and stars were also formed from air and floated above the earth. He believed that the sun and stars were made of air, but were set on fire due to the speed of their motion. The stars were fixed to a solid, crystalline structure that revolved around the earth. The sun and moon moved along circles around the earth, but were closer to the earth than the stars. Anaximenes also had a unique explanation for natural phenomena, such as rain, thunder, and lightning. He suggested that rain is produced when air condenses and turns into water. Thunder and lightning occur when clouds, condensed air, collide, or are split apart by the force of wind, rarefied air. Metaphysics and the concept of air as soul. Anaximenes' idea that air was the principle of life extended beyond cosmology into the realm of metaphysics. He believed that air was not only the substance that gave rise to the material world, but also the force that animated living beings. He likened the role of air in the cosmos to the role of breath, pneuma or soul in human life. Anaximenes reasoned that just as breath air sustains life in humans, so air sustains and animates the entire cosmos. This led him to suggest that air was both the substance and the animating force behind life. This metaphysical extension of his natural philosophy demonstrated his belief in a deep connection between the microcosms, individual beings, and the macrocosm, the universe. In this view, air serves both as the material and the spiritual principle that unites the cosmos, works in fragments. Like his predecessor Anaximander, Anaximenes is said to have written a work titled On Nature Periphysios. However, no complete texts by Anaximenes have survived. What we know of his ideas comes from later philosophers such as Aristotle, Theophrastus, and Simplicius, who discussed his theories in their own writings. Only a few fragments and indirect references remain, but these are enough to give us a clear picture of his contributions to natural philosophy. One important quote attributed to Anaximenes summarizes his views on the role of air as the fundamental principle of life and the cosmos. Just as our soul, being air, holds us together, so do breath and air encompass the whole cosmos. This fragment emphasizes the universal significance of air in both living beings and the broader universe. Anaximenes' concept of air as both substance and soul reflects a unifying principle in his thought, that a single element can account for both the material and the vital aspects of existence. Influence and legacy. Anaximenes' work had a lasting impact on natural philosophy and later developments in cosmology. His attempt to explain the transformation of matter using a single substance, air, was an important precursor to later scientific theories that sought to identify the basic building blocks of nature. Heraclitus, who followed Anaximenes, was influenced by the idea that a single, dynamic element, in his case, fire, could account for the changes and transformations in the universe. Parmenides and Empedocles also engaged with the idea of fundamental substances and opposites, though they proposed more complex systems of elements and forces. Aristotle would later refine these early cosmological theories by proposing the four classical elements: earth, water, air, and fire as the fundamental building blocks of nature. Anaximenes' theory of air's transformations contributed to the Aristotelian framework of the elements. Anaximenes' ideas also prefigured certain aspects of modern physics. His concept of condensation and rarefaction as processes that explain how one substance can transform into others is similar to the modern scientific understanding of how matter changes its state: solid, liquid, gas, under different physical conditions. His insight into the material nature of air and its ability to undergo transformations foreshadowed later scientific inquiries into the nature of gases and the atmosphere. Conclusion. Anaximenes of Miletus played a pivotal role in the early development of natural philosophy, continuing the intellectual tradition of the Milesian school. By proposing air as the fundamental substance of the cosmos, he offered a naturalistic explanation for the universe's origin and structure. that moved further away from mythological narratives. His belief in the transformative nature of air through condensation and rarefaction provided an early framework for understanding the dynamic nature of matter. Anaximenes' legacy as a thinker lies in his commitment to rational inquiry and his influence on subsequent philosophical and scientific thought. Chapter 4: Pythagoras. Pythagoras, c. 570 t. 495 BCE of Samos, was a legendary Greek philosopher and mathematician whose ideas profoundly influenced both ancient thought and later developments in Western philosophy and science. He is best known today for the Pythagorean theorem in mathematics, but his philosophical and religious ideas extended far beyond geometry. Pythagoras is credited with founding the Pythagorean school, a community of philosophers and religious thinkers dedicated to the study of mathematics, cosmology, ethics, and the nature of the soul. His influence on mathematics, music theory, and philosophy has had an enduring legacy throughout history. Life and background. Pythagoras was born around 570 BCE on the island of Samos, located in the Aegean Sea near the coast of present-day Turkey. He is believed to have been the son of Anaximander, a wealthy merchant. Much of the biographical information about Pythagoras comes from later sources, and many aspects of his life are shrouded in myth and legend. Nevertheless, there are several key events and influences that shaped his life and thought. Pythagoras is said to have traveled widely in his youth, visiting Egypt, Babylon, and possibly India, where he is thought to have learned mathematics, astronomy, and religious practices. These travels likely introduced him to Eastern spiritual and mathematical ideas, which deeply influenced his own teachings. Upon his return to Greece, Pythagoras eventually settled in Croton in southern Italy, where he founded a religious and philosophical community known as the Pythagorean Brotherhood. The Pythagorean school combined philosophical inquiry with mystical and religious practices. Pythagoras' followers adhered to strict ethical codes, practiced vegetarianism, and engaged in communal living. The school was highly secretive, and its members shared both scientific and mystical beliefs, making it difficult to distinguish between the historical facts and later embellishments about Pythagoras' life and thought. Philosophical thought. Pythagoras' philosophy was based on the belief that numbers and mathematical relationships form the underlying structure of reality. He saw numbers not merely as abstract symbols, but as the fundamental principles of existence, governing both the cosmos and the soul. Mathematics and the Pythagorean theorem. Pythagoras' most famous contribution to mathematics is the Pythagorean theorem, which states that in a right-angled triangle, the square of the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares of the other two sides. This theorem, represented by the equation ABC, was not only a major development in geometry, but also demonstrated the power of mathematical relationships to describe and understand the natural world. While Pythagoras is often credited with discovering the theorem, it is likely that this knowledge was part of earlier mathematical traditions, particularly from Babylonian mathematics. However, Pythagoras and his followers placed the theorem within a broader philosophical framework, using it to illustrate their belief that numbers governed the harmony and structure of the universe. Numerology and cosmology. One of the central tenets of Pythagorean philosophy was the belief that numbers were the essence of all things. Pythagoras and his followers developed a system of numerology, assigning symbolic and mystical meanings to different numbers. For example, the number 1 represented unity and the origin of all things. The number 2 symbolized duality or opposition. The number 3 was associated with harmony and the synthesis of opposites. The number 4 was linked to justice and stability. In Pythagorean cosmology, numbers and mathematical ratios were believed to explain the structure of the universe. Pythagoras proposed that the cosmos was governed by the harmony of numbers, which he believed could be observed in the motions of the planets, the cycles of nature, and even music. Music and harmonics. Pythagoras' study of music theory and harmonics was another major aspect of his philosophical system. He discovered that musical harmony is based on mathematical ratios. For example, the ratio of the lengths of strings that produce harmonious sounds are simple numerical ratios, such as 21 the octave, 32 the perfect fifth, and 43 the perfect fourth. This discovery led Pythagoras to conclude that the entire universe was governed by similar harmonious ratios, an idea known as the harmony of the spheres. He believed that the movements of the planets and stars produced a kind of cosmic music, inaudible to human ears, but reflective of the same mathematical principles that governed musical harmony on Earth. The Pythagoreans saw music as a means of spiritual purification, and believed that it could influence the soul's alignment with the harmony of the cosmos. This belief in the mystical power of numbers to bring harmony to both the cosmos and the human soul was central to Pythagorean thought. Metaphysics and the soul. Pythagoras also developed a complex metaphysical system that included beliefs about the soul, reincarnation, and ethics. His views on the soul were heavily influenced by Orphic religious traditions, which emphasized the immortality of the soul and its journey through multiple lifetimes. Doctrine of reincarnation, metempsychosis. One of the most distinctive aspects of Pythagoras' philosophy is his belief in metempsychosis, or the transmigration of the soul. He taught that the soul was immortal, and that it was continually reincarnated into different bodies after death. This process of reincarnation was seen as part of the soul's purification, an ascent toward ultimate unity with the divine. Pythagoras believed that the soul's journey through different incarnations was influenced by its ethical conduct during life. Souls that led virtuous lives were able to ascend to higher forms of existence, while those that lived immorally were reincarnated into lower life forms. The ultimate goal of the soul was to achieve purification and release from the cycle of reincarnation, allowing it to reunite with the divine. Ethics and the Pythagorean way of life. Ethical conduct was central to Pythagorean philosophy. Pythagoras taught that living a harmonious life, aligned with the mathematical and cosmic order, would lead to the purification of the soul. His followers practiced vegetarianism, avoided certain foods, like beans, and adhered to strict moral codes that promoted self-discipline, moderation, and purity. The Pythagorean community believed in the harmony of body, mind, and soul, and practiced daily rituals of introspection, meditation, and physical exercise. They also adhered to a belief in nonviolence, extending their ethical concerns to the treatment of animals, which they believed had souls like humans. Works and teachings. Pythagoras himself is not known to have written anything, and much of what we know about his teachings comes from later sources such as Aristotle, Plato, and Diogenes Laertius, as well as from Pythagoras' followers, the Pythagoreans. This lack of direct writings has made it difficult to distinguish between the historical Pythagoras and the legends that developed around him. Many of the teachings attributed to Pythagoras were likely developed by the Pythagorean school over generations. The school was deeply secretive, and much of its knowledge was transmitted orally, adding to the difficulty of distinguishing Pythagoras' original ideas from those of his followers. Influence and legacy. Pythagoras' influence on both ancient philosophy and modern thought is profound. His ideas about mathematics, cosmology, ethics, and the soul had a lasting impact on both Platonic and Aristotelian philosophy, as well as on later developments in mathematics and science. Plato was heavily influenced by Pythagorean ideas, particularly the belief that mathematical forms underlie reality. Plato's theory of forms echoes the Pythagorean view that the cosmos is governed by an invisible mathematical order. Aristotle admired Pythagoras for his contributions to mathematics, but criticized his mystical and religious interpretations of numbers. Pythagoras' influence on mathematics and science is most directly seen in his contributions to geometry and number theory. The Pythagorean theorem became a cornerstone of Euclidean geometry, while Pythagorean ideas about mathematical harmony influenced early scientific investigations into astronomy, music, and physics, Pythagoras' mystical and religious teachings also left a deep imprint on later esoteric traditions, including Neoplatonism, Hermeticism, and Renaissance occultists. His ideas about the harmony of the spheres and the spiritual power of numbers continued to inspire philosophers, mystics, and scientists for centuries. Conclusion: Pythagoras was a towering figure in the history of philosophy and mathematics, known not only for his mathematical discoveries, but also for his profound contributions to metaphysics, ethics, and the philosophy of the soul. His belief that numbers govern the universe, and his insights into the harmony of the cosmos, laid the foundations for both scientific inquiry and mystical thought. The Pythagorean school, with its blend of mathematical rigor and religious mysticism, has left an indelible mark on the intellectual history of the West. Chapter 5: Heraclitus. Heraclitus c. 535 c. 475 BCE, often referred to as the weeping philosopher or the obscure, was a pre-Socratic philosopher from Ephesus in present-day Turkey. He is one of the most enigmatic and influential thinkers in ancient philosophy. His philosophical ideas centered on the unity of opposites and the notion that everything is in a constant state of flux, were revolutionary and set him apart from his contemporaries. Heraclitus is best known for his doctrine that change is the fundamental essence of the universe, often encapsulated by his famous saying, "You cannot step into the same river twice." Heraclitus had a profound impact on later philosophical traditions, particularly on Stoicism and Platonism, and his ideas continue to be discussed and debated to this day. Life and background: Heraclitus was born around 535 BCE into an aristocratic family in Ephesus, a prominent city on the coast of Ionia. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Heraclitus rejected political and social roles that were expected of someone of his status. He reportedly renounced his birthright to become king in favor of a solitary philosophical life. This detachment from worldly concerns, along with his often cryptic and difficult writing style, earned him the title of the Obscure. Very little is known about Heraclitus' life, and what we do know largely comes from later writers such as Diogenes Laertius and Plato. However, Heraclitus' philosophy, preserved in the form of fragments, speaks powerfully to his beliefs about the nature of the universe and human life. Philosophical thought: Heraclitus' thought is centered on two main concepts: the idea of constant change and the unity of opposites. He believed that everything is in flux, and that conflict and opposition are inherent to the structure of the world. His philosophy can be seen as an attempt to reconcile the constant movement and transformation in the universe with the idea of an underlying cosmic order. Doctrine of flux panta rei. Heraclitus' most famous philosophical idea is the doctrine of flux, the notion that everything is in a constant state of change. According to Heraclitus, the universe is not static, but is continuously changing and becoming. This idea is often captured in his well-known fragment, "You cannot step into the same river twice." Fragment DK 2212. This statement implies that, because the waters are constantly flowing, the river is never the same from one moment to the next. The river, like everything else in life, is in constant flux. Heraclitus believed that change is the fundamental reality of the universe, and that stability or permanence is an illusion. Everything, according to him, is in a state of becoming, where opposites are in constant tension. This concept of flux extended to all aspects of life and nature: growth, decay, life, death, and even the cosmos itself. Fire as the arch. Heraclitus viewed fire as the basic element or principal arch, underlying all change. He believed fire symbolized both destruction and creation, as it is constantly in motion and capable of transforming other elements. Fire for Heraclitus was the metaphor for the process of change, and the driving force behind the transformations of the world. Unity of opposites. Heraclitus also emphasized the unity of opposites, arguing that opposing forces or elements are not merely in conflict, but are also interdependent and create balance. He famously stated, "War is the father of all and king of all." Fragment DK 2012-53. For Heraclitus, conflict and opposition were necessary to maintain the order of the cosmos. Strife and harmony were not mutually exclusive, but were intimately connected. The constant tension between opposites such as day and night, life and death, hot and cold was what sustained the universe and allowed it to function. He also saw life and death, good and evil, and harmony and discord as different aspects of the same reality. In this way, he argued that without opposition, there would be no creation or motion. This perspective was radical for its time, as it suggested that conflict was not a negative force, but an essential part of the natural order, logos, reason, and cosmic law. Central to Heraclitus' thought is the concept of the logos, which he saw as the underlying rational principle governing the universe. The logos, for Heraclitus, was an eternal law that permeated all things and ensured that, even in the midst of constant flux, there was an underlying order and harmony. He described the logos as the guiding force behind all change, a kind of rational structure to which all things are subject, whether they realize it or not. Despite this cosmic order, Heraclitus believed that most people fail to understand or recognize the logos, instead living their lives in ignorance, listening not to me but to the logos. It is wise to agree that all things are one. Fragment DK 2012-50. This statement suggests that wisdom consists in understanding the unity that exists despite the apparent diversity and opposition in the world. The logos is what ensures the balance of opposites and the continuity of change. It represents both the cosmic law and the rational principle that connects all things. Fire and cosmology. Heraclitus' concept of fire was central to his cosmology. He saw fire as both a physical element and a metaphor for the continuous process of transformation that characterizes the universe. Fire, for Heraclitus, symbolizes both destruction and creation it consumes, but also gives rise to new things. He believed that the cosmos itself was like a fire, constantly changing and renewing itself in a cycle of destruction and rebirth. The cosmos works according to fire, kindling in measures and going out in measures. Fragment DK 2012-30. This fragment highlights Heraclitus' belief that the cosmos is subject to an eternal cycle of fire, where everything is transformed according to a cosmic rhythm or law of nature. The universe is in a state of constant renewal, governed by the same logos that drives all natural processes, human nature and ethics. Heraclitus' views on human nature and ethics were closely tied to his cosmological ideas. He believed that just as the universe is governed by the logos, so too should human life be guided by an understanding of this cosmic law. He criticized those who lived without awareness of the logos, accusing them of ignorance and foolishness. He saw the soul as a reflection of the cosmic processes of the universe, particularly in its capacity for change and development. Heraclitus believed that souls could be improved through the pursuit of wisdom and self-knowledge, which involved recognizing the interconnectedness of all things and the necessity of embracing conflict and change. A dry soul is wisest and best. Fragment DK 22-118. This metaphor suggests that a dry soul, one that is not weighed down by material desires or ignorance, is more in tune with the logos and thus capable of wisdom. Ethical implications. Heraclitus' ideas had significant ethical implications. He taught that individuals must align themselves with the natural order and reason of the universe represented by the logos. Living in accordance with the logos meant accepting the reality of change, conflict, and the unity of opposites. Those who failed to grasp the logos were doomed to live in ignorance and disharmony with the world. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Heraclitus did not advocate for a specific moral code or set of rules. Instead, he emphasized the importance of self-knowledge, introspection, and awareness of the broader cosmic order. Works and fragments. Heraclitus is believed to have written a single work, often referred to as On Nature Periphasius. But this text has not survived in its entirety. What remains of his thought comes to us through fragments, quotations, and paraphrases preserved by later philosophers, such as Plato, Aristotle, and Diogenes Laertius. These fragments are often cryptic and difficult to interpret, contributing to Heraclitus' reputation as an obscure and enigmatic thinker. His use of paradoxes, metaphors, and figurative language has made his work a subject of much debate among scholars. Nonetheless, the surviving fragments offer profound insights into his view of the cosmos, human existence, and the nature of change. Influence and legacy. Heraclitus' influence on later philosophers, particularly Plato, Aristotle, and the Stoics, was immense. His ideas about flux, change, and the unity of opposites were pivotal in shaping ancient and modern philosophy. Plato was deeply influenced by Heraclitus' concept of constant change, and the idea that the physical world is in a state of flux. In Plato's theory of forms, the world of appearances is constantly changing, while the world of forms ideas remains eternal and unchanging. Plato used Heraclitus' ideas as a basis for his distinction between the sensible world and the intelligible world. Aristotle engaged critically with Heraclitus' thought, particularly with the doctrine of flux. While Aristotle disagreed with Heraclitus' belief that everything was in constant change, he acknowledged Heraclitus' contributions to the development of natural philosophy and metaphysics. The Stoics, particularly the later Roman Stoics like Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, were influenced by Heraclitus' concept of the logos as the rational principle governing the universe. The Stoic idea that living in harmony with nature and accepting the cosmic order as inevitable reflects Heraclitean thought. In modern times, philosophers such as Hegel, Nietzsche, and Heidegger drew inspiration from Heraclitus' views on change, conflict, and becoming. Nietzsche famously admired Heraclitus for his rejection of static being and his emphasis on the dynamism of life. Conclusion: Heraclitus remains one of the most profound and challenging figures in the history of philosophy. His emphasis on the perpetual flux of the universe, the unity of opposites, and the central role of the logos has had a lasting impact on both ancient and modern thought. Though often difficult to interpret, his work offers timeless insights into the nature of existence, the inevitability of change, and the necessity of understanding the world as a dynamic, interconnected whole. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel. To be continued in Part 2.